For 3 years. My husband Quincy made me feel like I was crazy. Crazy for disliking his female best friend, Nell. Crazy for questioning their late-night texts. He swore it was all in my head. But the proof of his betrayal wasn't what I expected. And the way I ended it all, well, let's just say it deserved a standing ovation. This story is a wild ride of gaslighting and sweet justice. If you're ready for it, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss stories like this. The rich, savory smell of garlic and onions, sweating in hot olive oil usually brings a sense of calm to our apartment. A comforting signal that the day is over and we're home. Tonight, it felt different. The air was thick with unspoken things. Quincy was leaning against the cool granite of the island, swirling a glass of deep red Cabernet. He was telling me a long, meandering story about a new hire at his architectural firm. A kid fresh out of college who didn't know how to use the drafting software. He was animated, his hands shaping buildings in the air. And in the warm, recessed lighting of our kitchen, he looked exactly like the man I fell in love with. The illusion was nearly perfect. "Honey, can you grab the wine?" I asked, my voice a little tight. I was stirring a risotto, and the constant motion was the only thing keeping my own thoughts from spiraling. He moved without a word, taking the bottle from the counter and refilling my glass before his own. It was a small, familiar gesture of care. A piece of choreography we'd perfected over 3 years. But tonight, it felt hollow, like a line read from a script he'd long since memorized. A quiet, seemingly perfect evening like this has a strange way of dredging up memories, of reminding you exactly when the first hairline cracks began to appear in the foundation. For me, it always comes back to a loud, sticky-floored bar downtown. 3 years ago, Quincy had been practically vibrating with excitement in the car on the way there. He was finally introducing me to his legendary best friend, Nell. "You're going to love her, Kristen," he'd promised, squeezing my hand. "She's hilarious. She can be a little intense, I guess, but it's in the best way. She's fiercely loyal." I remember walking in and being hit by a wall of noise and the smell of stale beer and something vaguely sweet, like cheap perfume. I was nervous, eager to make a good impression on this person who held such a significant place in his life. I had pictured us becoming friends, sharing inside jokes, the three of us forming a tight, easy circle. Then I saw her. She was scanning the crowded room, a look of impatience on her face until her eyes landed on Quincy. The transformation was breathtaking. A huge, brilliant smile erupted across her face. A smile of pure, undiluted joy. She strode towards us, her focus so entirely on him that I might as well have been invisible. She threw her arms around his neck, a greeting so enthusiastic it was almost theatrical. He laughed, a deep, happy sound, and hugged her back before gently unwinding her arms and turning her towards me. "Nell, this is my girlfriend, Kristen," he said, his hand finding the small of my back in a gesture of ownership and pride. It was like watching a curtain fall. The brilliant, radiant smile didn't just fade, it was forcefully retracted, replaced by a polite, paper-thin line. Her eyes, which had been sparkling with genuine warmth for Quincy just a second before, went flat and cold as they performed a swift, head-to-toe assessment of me. They lingered for a moment on his hand on my back. "Oh, hi," she said, her voice a full octave lower than the one she'd used to greet him. She extended a hand, not in a welcoming gesture, but as a formal necessity, I took it. Her skin was cool. Her grip limp. "It's so great to finally meet you," I said, trying to overcompensate for the sudden drop in temperature. "Quincy talks about you all the time." Was all she said in response. And then I felt it. A sharp, deliberate pressure. I glanced down. Her perfectly manicured, blood-red fingernails were digging into the soft skin on the back of my hand. Right over the bone. It wasn't a casual part of the handshake, it was a clear, unmistakable message. He is mine. She held the pressure for a beat too long before releasing me. And then she turned her entire body back towards Quincy, creating a physical barrier between us. I had been acknowledged, assessed, and dismissed in under 30 seconds. The rest of the night was a masterclass in exclusion. She stood shoulder to shoulder with him at the bar, forcing me to stand slightly behind them, craning my neck to hear. If I ventured a comment into their conversation, she would respond by asking Quincy a completely unrelated question. She laughed loudly at his jokes, touching his arm. Her eyes locked on his, creating an impenetrable bubble of shared history that I was not invited into. I felt less like his girlfriend and more like an awkward intern on her first day at a new job. The car ride home was thick with a silence that felt heavier than the bass that was still thumping in my ears. "Well, she's something," I finally managed, aiming for a breezy tone that I didn't feel. Quincy just let out a small chuckle, his eyes fixed on the rain-slicked road ahead. "Babe, that's just how Nell is. She takes a while to warm up to people. She's very protective of me. Don't take it personally." But I did take it personally. It was impossible not to. This wasn't a case of social awkwardness. It was a targeted, deliberate campaign of exclusion. A warning shot fired across the bow of our relationship. That night was the template for the next 3 years. Nell's hostility never wavered, it just became more refined. She mastered the art of the microaggression, the kind of subtle cruelty that, if you called it out, would make you look like the crazy one. There was the time at a friend's barbecue where I told a story about my childhood, and she waited for me to finish before saying, loud enough for everyone to hear, "That is such a sweet, simple story." It wasn't what she said, but the condescending tone she used, as if I were a child showing off a crayon drawing, or the constant, overly long hugs she'd give Quincy whenever we'd meet or part, her eyes often finding mine over his shoulder with a look of smug triumph. After a year of feeling like I was in a silent battle for a position I already held, I gave up. I told Quincy, as calmly and rationally as I could, that I was done trying. "I'm happy that you have her in your life, Quincy. I am. But I don't need that energy in mine. From now on, you can see her on your own." He wasn't angry, but a look of deep, weary disappointment crossed his face, a look that, I realized with a jolt, was directed at me, as if I were the one creating the problem. But he didn't fight it. He just sighed and said, "Okay, if that's what you want." A fragile peace settled over our home, but it was the quiet of a cold war, not of true harmony. There was now a clearly defined part of his life that was off limits to me. A secret territory with a population of 2. One night, months later, we were curled up on the couch, watching some mindless action movie. It was late, and the apartment was quiet save for the sound of explosions on the screen. In the safety of the darkness, a question I'd long held back finally slipped out. "Hey," I whispered, tracing a pattern on the sleeve of his sweatshirt. "Can I ask you something? You and Nell, you guys never, Like, dated or anything in the past. Did you? His whole body went rigid. He pulled his arm from under my head and sat up, creating a sudden, cold space between us on the couch. He muted the television. What? No. Of course not. Why would you even ask that? I don't know, I said, my voice suddenly small. It's just the way you are together. And the way she is with me. She seems so possessive. I was just curious. Why are you always so suspicious? Kristen. His voice was sharp now, cutting through the quiet room. Why do you have to turn everything into a problem? I'm allowed to have a female best friend. This is about your insecurity, not my friendship with her. You just don't like her. So you're inventing a conspiracy. Each word was a small, precise stab. He wasn't just denying it. He was diagnosing me, labeling my valid feelings as a symptom of a personal flaw. The heat of shame crept up my neck. I immediately backpedaled, murmuring apologies, feeling foolish and paranoid. He had expertly flipped the entire situation. And once again, I was the one in the wrong. A few days later, he came home with flowers and my favorite Thai takeout. He was in full damage control mode. Over dinner, he brought up our upcoming 4th anniversary in April. I was thinking, he said, his voice soft and conciliatory, we should do something really big. A real trip. Just you and me. No one else. We'll go somewhere amazing. I promise. To get us back on track. It was an olive branch. And I grabbed it with both hands. The thought of it, just the two of us. Away from everyone. Reconnecting felt like a lifeline. I let myself believe it. For a few weeks, things felt better. Lighter. I pushed the unease down, convincing myself he was right. That it was all in my head. Then, one evening, I was in the living room reading. Quincy had gone into the kitchen to grab a beer. He'd left his phone face up on the coffee table. A habit I'd never thought twice about. But then it lit up. The screen glowed in the dim room, and my eyes were drawn to it against my will. A notification from Nell. It wasn't a sentence. It was just a single, bold, red heart emoji. My own heart seized in my chest. Before the screen could go dark, it lit up again with a preview of his reply. Sent instantly from his Apple Watch. Thinking of you. The world seemed to fall silent. Just 3 words. 3 simple, devastating words. I stared at the dark screen. The image burned into my mind. I could hear my pulse thudding in my ears. My mind raced, desperately trying to construct an innocent explanation. Maybe she sent him some good news. Maybe he's just being a supportive friend. But my gut, that deep, primal instinct I had been trying to silence for 3 years, was screaming at me. This wasn't friendship. This was something else. I felt a cold dread spread through me, pinning me to the couch. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. When he walked back into the room and sat down beside me, I just pretended to be engrossed in my book. The words on the page blurring into meaningless shapes. Several more weeks passed in that fragile, artificial peace. I never mentioned the text. It felt like a secret I was keeping from myself as much as from him. Then one night, he burst through the door. His face alight with a kind of boyish excitement I hadn't seen in a long time. I have the best idea, he announced, dropping his briefcase with a thud. You know how we were talking about our anniversary trip? Well, I was talking to Mark today, and I've come up with a new plan. It's going to be so much fun. I looked up from the mail I was sorting, forcing a smile. Okay. What's the plan? He was beaming, his eyes sparkling with an oblivious joy that made my stomach clench. We're going to make it a group thing. We'll go with Mark and his new girlfriend, Chloe, and maybe one or two other friends. A big anniversary getaway. He said it like he was offering me the greatest gift in the world. But all I heard was a faint, insistent ringing in my ears. It was the sound of an alarm bell. One I knew I could no longer ignore. My husband stood there in the entryway, beaming with a self-satisfied pride. As if he had just solved world hunger instead of suggesting we turn our anniversary, the one meant to celebrate the union of two people, into a party bus. The alarm bell that had started ringing in my mind was now a low, insistent hum. A baseline frequency of dread beneath the surface of my skin. A group trip, I asked, forcing my lips into a smile that felt brittle, like it might crack and fall off my face. That's an interesting idea. Who were you thinking of? Well, definitely Mark. Obviously, he said, shrugging off his coat and hanging it in the closet. And he's been dating this new girl, Chloe, for a few months. He's really into her. So it would be cool for all of us to get to know her better. And maybe, I don't know, maybe Nell, if she's free. He said her name casually, tacking it onto the end of the sentence as if it were an afterthought. But it wasn't. It was the whole point. I felt it in my bones. He was trying to find a way to fold her back into our shared life. Using other people as a buffer. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the stack of mail in my hand at his head. Instead, I took a slow, deep breath. Two could play at this game. Okay, I said, my voice unnaturally bright. Yeah, that could be fun. I like Mark. And I'd love to get to know Chloe better. I chose to ignore the mention of Nell completely, letting it hang in the air between us. Unspoken and unacknowledged. For now. And then, for a full month, there was nothing. The anniversary getaway, as Quincy had dubbed it, seemed to evaporate into thin air. He didn't mention it again. Life settled back into its comfortable, familiar rhythm: work, dinner, Netflix, sleep, repeat. But for me, nothing was comfortable. The silence around the trip was louder than any argument. It was a constant, nagging presence in our apartment. I'd find myself watching him as he scrolled through his phone on the couch, wondering if he was texting them. I'd hear him laugh at something on his laptop, and a cold knot of suspicion would tighten in my stomach. The trip had become this Schrodinger's vacation. It both existed and didn't exist. And the uncertainty was eating me alive. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. It was a Saturday morning, and we were cleaning the kitchen together. The sun was streaming through the window, and for a moment, everything felt almost normal. I decided to approach it casually, like it had just popped into my head. Hey, I said, wiping down the counter. I was just thinking about that trip you mentioned last month. Is that still happening? He didn't look at me. He kept his focus on loading the dishwasher. His movements suddenly very deliberate. There was a pause that lasted just a fraction of a second too long. Oh. Yeah. About that, he started, his voice a little strained. The guys and I were talking, and we kind of decided to make it a no-girlfriends trip. You know, just some guy time. We haven't had one of those in forever. I stopped wiping the counter. The cloth in my hand was suddenly cold and damp. My blood felt like it was turning to ice water in my veins. He was lying. It wasn't a guess. It wasn't a suspicion. It was a certainty, as solid and real as the granite beneath my hands, the way he avoided my eyes, the way his voice had a slight, artificial cheerfulness to it. It was the worst acted scene I had ever witnessed. He was a terrible liar. But I knew, in that instant, that calling him out would be a mistake. It would just devolve into another circular argument where he would twist my words, accuse me of being jealous and insecure, and I would end up apologizing for having feelings. He needed to believe he had gotten away with it. "Oh," I said, my voice a carefully constructed imitation of disappointment, mixed with understanding. "Okay. That's fine. I get it. You guys should totally have your guy time." I turned away before he could see the look in my eyes, grabbing a glass from the counter and taking it to the sink. Inside, a storm was raging. He had looked me in the face and told me a blatant, easily disprovable lie. And he had done it to exclude me from our own anniversary celebration. The betrayal was so profound, it left me breathless. This was no longer about Nell. This was about him. This was about a fundamental lack of respect that I realized had been there all along. That evening, the universe decided to hand me the proof I needed on a silver platter. We were on the couch, half watching a movie. Quincy got up to get us some ice cream. He left his phone on the cushion beside me. And then it happened. The screen lit up. A notification from a WhatsApp group chat. My eyes shot to it, my heart beginning to pound a frantic, heavy rhythm against my ribs. The group name was a Gut Punch Anniversary Getaway. And right there, in the preview of the latest message, was the name of the sender, Chloe. The room tilted slightly. My breath caught in my throat. I sat there, frozen, staring at the dark screen. The words burned into my retinas. He hadn't just lied. He had constructed an elaborate, insulting fiction to hide a simple, ugly truth. When he came back into the room, holding 2 bowls of ice cream, I kept my eyes fixed on the television screen. He handed me a bowl and settled back onto the couch, completely oblivious. I let a few minutes of silence pass, the sound of the movie filling the space between us. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure he could hear it. I took a spoonful of ice cream, the cold shock of it doing nothing to quell the fire in my chest. Then, I turned to him, my expression a carefully crafted mask of gentle curiosity. "I thought you said it was a no-girlfriends trip," I asked, my voice as calm and even as I could make it. "Why is Chloe in the group chat?" The change in him was instantaneous and violent. His relaxed posture vanished. He physically flinched, and his eyes darted from my face to his phone on the couch as if it were a venomous snake. He snatched it up, his movements jerky and panicked, and immediately turned the screen away from me. "It's a private conversation, Kristen," he said, his voice low and defensive. That was it. That was the whole confession. His panicked reaction was more damning than any words could ever be. He wasn't just a bad liar, he was a coward. "A private conversation about our anniversary trip that I'm not allowed to be a part of," I pressed, my voice still quiet, but now edged with steel. I saw her name. Quincy. Why is she in there if I'm not? She's just helping Mark plan some of the logistics. That's all, he stammered, his eyes refusing to meet mine. "Let me see the phone." It wasn't a request. "No, it's private." "Let me see it." "Quincy." A tense, ugly silence stretched between us. He was cornered, and we both knew it. Finally, with a sigh of profound exasperation, as if I were the one being unreasonable, he thrust the phone at me. My hands were trembling slightly as I took it, I unlocked it and opened the group chat. And the full, brutal reality of his betrayal hit me with the force of a physical blow. The members of the anniversary getaway group were Quincy, Mark, Chloe, and Nell. 4 people. 2 guys. 2 girls. Going on a trip to celebrate my anniversary. Without me. I felt the blood drain from my face. It wasn't just a lie. It was a complete and total erasure of my existence. He hadn't just chosen his friends over me. He had chosen the feelings of his friend's new girlfriend, a woman he barely knew, and the feelings of Nell, a woman who actively despised me over the feelings of his own wife. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to close my eyes. I scrolled up, my thumb moving numbly over the screen. Reading their cheerful messages about booking flights and hotels, my name wasn't mentioned once. It was as if I had never existed at all. I handed the phone back to him without a word. I stood up from the couch and walked into our bedroom. Closing the door softly behind me, I heard him call my name. A questioning, uncertain sound. But I ignored it. He undressed, slid into my side of the bed, and pulled the covers up to my chin, facing away from the door. When he came in a few minutes later, I kept my breathing slow and even, pretending to be asleep. He stood in the doorway for a long moment before sighing and getting ready for bed. I lay there, rigid in the darkness, feeling the mattress dip as he got in beside me. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, a familiar warmth that now felt alien and repulsive. He didn't try to touch me. After a few minutes, his breathing deepened into the steady rhythm of sleep. But I did not sleep. I lay there, wide awake, staring into the oppressive darkness of our bedroom. The initial shock and the searing pain of the betrayal began to cool, to harden. They slowly transmuted into something else. Something cold, and clear, and incredibly powerful. It was resolve. The endless arguments, the gaslighting, the constant feeling of being second best, it was all over. He had made his choice. And now, I would make mine. My marriage wasn't just broken, it had been a sham. And it was not going to end with a quiet, tearful conversation. It was going to end on my terms. The credits were going to roll when I said they would. Lying there in the dark, listening to the steady, oblivious breathing of the man who had just shattered my heart. A plan began to form in my mind. A meticulous, calculated, and deeply satisfying plan. The next morning, I woke up before him. I slipped out of bed, went to the kitchen, and put on a pot of coffee. When he finally emerged, looking rumpled and a little uncertain, I smiled at him. It was a bright, effortless smile that didn't come anywhere near my eyes. "Good morning, honey," I said, handing him his favorite mug. "Have a great day at work." He took the mug from my hand, his fingers brushing against mine. For a fleeting second, I felt the ghost of a familiar spark, a muscle memory of affection that my body hadn't yet unlearned. He smiled, a genuine, relieved smile. He thought the storm had passed. He thought that last night's tension had dissolved with the morning light, as it so often had before. He had no idea that he wasn't standing in the calm after the storm, but in its cold, silent eye. "Thanks, babe," he said. Taking a sip of the coffee, he leaned in to kiss me, and I turned my head just enough so that his lips landed on my cheek instead of my mouth. It was a subtle rejection, small enough for him to dismiss as an accident. He left for work a few minutes later, whistling a tune I didn't recognize. The picture of a man without a care in the world. The moment the front door clicked shut, The smile fell from my face. My entire body, which had been held in a state of rigid control, went slack. I leaned against the counter and took a single, shuddering breath. Then, I got to work. The first call was to my bank. During my lunch break, I walked the 3 blocks from my office to the downtown branch, my heels clicking a steady, determined rhythm on the pavement. The air conditioning inside was a cool balm on my skin. Everything about the bank was designed to feel stable and secure the thick carpet. The quiet murmur of transactions. The solid weight of the doors. It was a fitting place to begin dismantling my life. I sat across from a pleasant-faced woman named Brenda and explained, in a calm, even voice, that I wanted to withdraw 50% of the funds from our joint savings account and deposit them into my personal checking account, which I'd kept open from before we were married. She tapped at her keyboard without any particular curiosity. To her, this was just another transaction on a Tuesday afternoon. To me, it was the signing of a Declaration of Independence. Watching the numbers shift on her screen, seeing that balance appear under my name and my name alone, felt like taking my first breath of clean, free air after years of breathing, something stale and recycled. The second call was to Sarah. She was my best friend from college. The one person who had seen through Quincy from the very beginning. She answered on the second ring. "Hey. You," she said, her voice warm and familiar. "What's up?" "I'm leaving him," I said. There was no preamble, no hesitation. The words came out clean and sharp. There was a moment of complete silence on the other end of the line. Then, "It's about damn time." There was no shock in her voice. Only a profound, weary relief. "What happened?" I gave her the short, brutal version, the lie about the trip. The group chat. Nell. I didn't cry. My voice was as steady as it had been with the bank teller. When I was finished, Sarah let out a long, low whistle. "That spineless, gaslighting weasel," she said. The venom in her voice a comforting antidote to my own suppressed rage. "What do you need? Just tell me." "I need a place to stay. Just for a little while. Until I can figure things out." "My couch is your throne, Queen," she said instantly, her voice fierce with loyalty. "Burn him to the ground." A small, genuine smile touched my lips for the first time all day. Knowing she was in my corner, no questions asked, felt like strapping on a suit of armor. That afternoon, I told my boss I had a migraine and left work early. The apartment was quiet and still when I let myself in, saturated with the late afternoon sun. It looked exactly the same as it had when I'd left that morning. But to me, it was now an alien landscape. A museum of a life that was no longer mine. I moved with a quiet, efficient purpose. I went to the back of our walk-in closet and pulled out the large suitcase we used for long vacations. It felt strangely heavy, even empty. I didn't pack indiscriminately. Every item was a choice. I took my favorite jeans, the soft, worn-in ones he always said he liked. I left behind the dress he'd bought me for my last birthday. I packed the worn paperback copy of my favorite novel, but left the hardcover collection of architectural books he'd given me for Christmas on the shelf. I moved through the room, collecting pieces of myself while discarding the pieces that were intertwined with him. I packed my grandmother's jewelry, my laptop, my passport. In the bathroom, I packed my toothbrush and skincare, but left his cologne standing on the counter. A solitary glass soldier. Each object I placed in the suitcase was an act of severing, A conscious uncoupling. When I was done, the suitcase was full. I zipped it up. The sound unnaturally loud in the silent apartment, and pushed it back into the far corner of the closet, hidden behind my winter coats. My final task was to secure the evidence. I knew confronting him with just my word against his was a fool's errand. He would deny, deflect, and manipulate until I was the one apologizing. I needed something irrefutable. I found his tablet lying on the nightstand. As I'd hoped, his WhatsApp was synced. I opened it. There it was, anniversary getaway. My heart gave a painful thud. But my hands were steady. I took my phone, angled it just so to avoid any glare, and took a series of crystal-clear screenshots. The list of participants, the cheerful messages about booking a villa with 2 bedrooms, Chloe asking Nell if she preferred a window seat. I captured it all. Then I sent the photos to my own email address and permanently deleted them from my phone's camera roll. The case was built. The evidence was secure. All that was left was the trial. That evening, I cooked his favorite meal, steak au poivre with creamy mashed potatoes. The smell of peppercorns toasting and butter browning filled the kitchen. It was an act of deliberate, almost cruel normalcy. He came home, kissed my cheek, and told me how amazing it smelled. He was completely at ease, convinced that whatever had bothered me the night before had been forgotten. We sat at the small dining table, the one we'd bought together at a flea market, and we ate. He talked about his day, about a problem with a contractor, about a funny email that had circulated around the office. I nodded and asked questions, and passed him the salt. I watched his face as he talked. This man I had loved. This stranger sitting across from me. And I felt nothing but a vast, cold emptiness. After dinner, we moved to the living room. He put on some music and sat on the couch. Scrolling through his phone, I sat in the armchair opposite him. The moment had come. Quincy, I said, my voice cutting through the soft jazz. We need to talk. He looked up from his phone, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes before he masked it. He sighed. Okay. What's up? I started on familiar ground. I want to talk about Nell. He immediately went on the defensive, his whole body tensing. Oh my God. Kristen, are we really doing this again? I thought we were past this. We're not, I said calmly. For 3 years. Every time I have told you that she disrespects me, that she makes me feel small and unwelcome, you have dismissed it. You have told me I'm being sensitive, or jealous, or that I'm imagining things. You have never once, not a single time, taken my side. Because there are no sides to take, he said, his voice rising. She's my friend. Fine, I said, holding up a hand. Let's move on. Let's talk about our anniversary trip. He shifted uncomfortably on the couch. He thought he was on safer ground now. What about it? You told me it was a no-girlfriends trip, I said, my voice flat and even. A guy's trip. Those were your exact words. He started to stammer, launching into the flimsy excuse he'd likely been rehearsing in his head. Right. Well, it started that way. But then Mark felt bad for Chloe, and she really wanted to go, and I didn't want to make it a big deal. I let him talk. Let him dig his own grave. When he finally trailed off, I looked him straight in the eye. So let me get this straight. You were more concerned about hurting the feelings of your friend's girlfriend of 3 months, a woman you barely know, than you were about hurting your own wife's feelings by lying to her and excluding her from our anniversary trip. He had no answer for that. He just stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. And Nell, I continued, delivering the final blow. She was going too. Wasn't she? 2 guys? 2 girls. A nice, neat little foursome. The color drained from his face. He looked utterly cornered. A panicked animal trapped in the headlights. This was the moment. I stood up. I've spent the last 3 years feeling like I was the third person in our marriage. I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. But what I realized last night is that I'm not even ranked that high. I am an afterthought. An inconvenience. And I am done. He just stared at me, completely stunned into silence. What? What are you talking about? He finally managed to say. I didn't answer. I turned and walked into the bedroom. I could hear him scrambling off the couch behind me. I went straight to the closet, pushed aside the winter coats, and pulled out the suitcase. I placed it in the middle of the room, the sight of it solid, real, and fully packed seemed to finally break through his shock. Raw panic flooded his eyes. Wait! What are you doing? He cried, his voice cracking. Kristen, stop this. Don't be so dramatic. I turned to face him, my hand on the handle of the suitcase. I looked directly into his panicked, pleading eyes. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt absolutely nothing. No pity. No anger. No sadness. Just quiet. Dramatic, I said, my voice dangerously soft. Oh, Quincy. The show is just getting started. Check your phone. In one smooth motion, I forwarded him the email with the screenshots. I saw his phone light up in his hand. Then I turned, pulled the suitcase behind me, and walked out of the bedroom, out of the living room, and out of the door, closing it firmly behind me without looking back. The click of the lock behind me was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It wasn't a bang, or a slam, but a quiet, definitive snap. The sound of a connection being severed. For a moment, I just stood there in the dimly lit hallway of our apartment building, the handle of the suitcase digging into my palm. The air smelled of old carpets and the faint, lingering scent of someone's dinner. It was the smell of a life that was no longer mine. I could feel the vibrations through the floor as Quincy scrambled around inside, probably staring at the screenshots on his phone, the undeniable proof of his own duplicity. I expected him to yank the door open, to start yelling, to beg, but he didn't. There was only silence. Even in this final moment, his instinct was to hide, to avoid the confrontation. I walked to the elevator, my footsteps echoing in the empty hall. The weight of the suitcase was a strange comfort, a solid, tangible anchor in the swirling chaos of my emotions. Inside the elevator, as the doors slid shut, my phone began to buzz in my pocket. I pulled it out. Quincy. I let it go to voicemail. A second later, a text message notification appeared. Then another. And another. The screen lit up again and again. A frantic strobe light in the small AU-16 and mirrored box. Kristen. Pick up the phone. This is a huge misunderstanding. You're overreacting. Please. Baby. Let's just talk about this. The messages shifted from confusion to accusation to desperate pleading in the space of 30 seconds. It was a perfect, condensed summary of our entire relationship. As I stepped out into the cool night air of the parking garage, the phone buzzed again. A call. I looked at his name on the screen. At the picture of us smiling on a beach in Mexico. A lifetime ago. My thumb hovered over the screen. For 3 years. A call from him had been a priority. An interruption I always accepted. Now, it was just a nuisance. I declined the call and, with a few taps, I blocked his number. I blocked him on WhatsApp. I blocked him on every social media platform we shared. Each press of my thumb was a snip of a string, cutting away the tethers of our shared life. A profound, almost shocking, quiet settled over my phone. It was done. The drive to Sarah's apartment was a blur. The city lights smeared across my windshield like wet paint. I had the windows down, and the cold night air rushed in, whipping my hair around my face and clearing my head. It felt like I was washing the scent of the apartment. The scent of him, out of my lungs. I didn't cry. I felt strangely, unnervingly calm. There was no grief. Not yet. There was only a vast, hollowed-out feeling of relief. I turned on the radio. And some loud, triumphant pop song I didn't recognize was playing. I turned the volume up until the bass vibrated through the driver's seat. For the first time in years, I wasn't worrying about what Quincy would think, or how Nell would react, or whether I was being too sensitive. I was just a woman in her car, driving towards a new life, with a terrible, wonderful song blasting on the radio. Sarah lived in a small, cozy apartment on the other side of town. She must have been watching from the window, because the moment I pulled into a parking spot, her front door flew open. She ran down the steps and enveloped me in a hug before I had even fully gotten out of the car. She held me tight. And it was only then, wrapped in the safety of her friendship, that I felt the first tremor run through me. "You did it," she whispered into my hair. "You actually did it." We hauled my suitcase up the stairs and into the warmth of her living room. She immediately handed me a glass of wine, sat me down on her ridiculously comfortable couch, and covered me with a soft blanket. "Talk to me," she said, her expression a mixture of fury and pride. "Tell me everything." And I did. I told her about the final conversation, about the look on his face when he saw the suitcase. And then, I took my final, calculated step. I opened my phone and pulled up my contacts. My thumb hovered over Mark's name. "What are you doing?" Sarah asked, peering over my shoulder. "Closing a loophole." I said, I knew Quincy. He would spin a version of this story where I was the unstable, jealous wife who flew off the handle over nothing. He would poison the well with their mutual friends. I wasn't going to let that happen. I typed out a short, concise message. My hands were perfectly steady. "Mark, I just want to let you know that I've left Quincy. I'm not going to get into all the details. But you deserve to know the truth about the trip. This is why I wasn't invited." I attached the screenshot of the group chat. The one with Chloe's name and Nell's name listed right there, with his. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. A few seconds later, the 3 little dots appeared, indicating he was typing. Then they disappeared. Then they appeared again. Finally, a message came through. "Oh my God. Kristen. I am Zoe. So sorry. I had no idea." I showed the phone to Sarah. She let out a slow, satisfied breath. "Checkmate," she said, and clinked her wine glass against mine. A few days passed in a strange, peaceful limbo on Sarah's couch. I worked from home, answered emails, and tried to ignore the gaping hole that had been ripped in the fabric of my life. And then, on a Thursday afternoon, Mark called. "Hey," he said, his voice hesitant. "Is this a bad time?" "No. It's fine. What's up?" I, I just wanted to apologize again. For all of it, Quincy told me this whole convoluted story about how you and I had a vibe and Chloe felt uncomfortable, and that's why you weren't coming. He made it sound like he was protecting her. And you. I felt a bitter laugh escape my lips. Of course he did. Yeah. Well, Mark said, and I could hear the anger in his voice. I showed Chloe your screenshot. The whole thing blew up. We're not together anymore. Turns out this wasn't the first time she's pulled something like this. And the trip is obviously cancelled. A part of me felt a pang of guilt for the collateral damage. But it was quickly replaced by a sense of grim satisfaction. The lies had unraveled. What about Quincy? I asked, my voice softer than I intended. Mark sighed heavily. He's a wreck. But not in the way you'd think. He keeps saying he doesn't understand what he did wrong. He's convinced that if he had just lied better, none of this would have happened. He honestly still thinks the core problem is that you're jealous of Nell. I closed my eyes. It was the validation I never knew I needed. He didn't get it. He was never going to get it. And my decision to leave wasn't a mistake. It was an act of self-preservation. The final loose end tied itself up a week later. I received a friend request on Instagram from an account I didn't recognize. The profile picture was a generic sunset. I clicked on it. It was Nell. And with the request came a message. I heard about what you did. I hope you're happy. You never deserved him anyway. I stared at the message for a long time. A year ago, those words would have devastated me. They would have fed every insecurity, every doubt I had about myself. Now, they just seemed pathetic, small and petty and completely irrelevant. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I just felt a profound sense of pity for her. Without another thought, I denied the request, blocked the account, and put my phone away. A few months later, I was standing in the middle of my own apartment. It was smaller than the one I had shared with Quincy. But every single thing in it was mine. The art on the walls, the books on the shelves, the mismatched coffee mugs in the kitchen. It was a space filled with my own choices. I was sitting by the window, watching the rain fall. When I finally understood, the problem wasn't that Quincy was a bad man. Not really. He was just a weak one. Zovart. So terrified of conflict and disappointment that he would rather construct a world of elaborate, hurtful lies than have one difficult conversation. His cowardice was a kind of passive cruelty that was, in its own way, more damaging than any overt act of malice. He hadn't just betrayed me. He had allowed me to believe I was crazy for 3 years to protect his own comfort. And I had learned the hardest lesson of all: you cannot build a life with someone who requires you to shrink yourself to fit inside it. The final scene of my old life played out not with a bang, but with a quiet, joyful evening. I was at a bar with a group of friends, including Mark, who seemed happier and lighter than I had ever seen him. We were laughing so hard at one of his terrible jokes that I had tears running down my cheeks. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from a man I'd recently met. Someone kind and funny, asking if I was free later in the week. I smiled at the message. But instead of replying right away, I silenced my phone and dropped it back in my purse. I turned my attention back to my friends, to the warmth of the lights and the sound of their laughter. I was here, in this moment, completely and utterly present. And I was finally free.